The power cord sparked and died in Marcus's hands as his wife's oxygen concentrator fell silent. Across the yard, Karen's ATV roared to life, powered by electricity she'd stolen from his shed. She had no idea what she'd just done nor that Marcus was about to turn her joyride into a nightmare she'd never forget. Marcus. Chen knelt beside the hospital bed that had consumed his living room for 3 months. Watching the green numbers on Linda's oxygen concentrator flicker and fade to black, the machine's steady hum, the soundtrack of their new reality, died with a mechanical wheeze that sounded almost human. Marcus. Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper, her chest rising and falling, in short, panicked gasps. The machine? Why did it stop? He pressed the power button frantically, his thumb leaving sweat marks on the plastic. Nothing. The LED display remained dark as a tombstone. Outside, the November wind rattled their century-old farmhouse windows, and somewhere in the distance, an engine roared to life. It's okay, baby. It's going to be okay. The lie burned his throat as he fumbled for his phone. 3 bars. He dialed the medical supply company with shaking fingers. Thank you for calling MedTech Solutions. Due to high call volume, he hung up and tried again. Same recording. 3rd time, same useless automated voice, offering him everything except what he needed, his wife's next breath. Linda's fingernails had started turning blue. The backup oxygen tank sat in the corner like a silver guardian angel, but Marcus knew it held maybe 6 hours of life. After that, he pushed the thought away and connected the portable unit to Linda's nasal cannula. The soft hiss of flowing oxygen filled the room, and color slowly returned to her face. What happened? She asked, her voice stronger now but laced with the fear they both carried like a second skin. Power surge, maybe. I'll check the circuit breaker. He kissed her forehead, tasting salt and the medicinal smell that had become as familiar as her perfume once was. Rest now. Marcus stepped onto their back porch, and the November air hit him like cold truth. Their property stretched out before him, 40 acres of prairie grass and memories, bounded by a gravel road that led to their nearest neighbor, Karen Hutchins, a woman who'd made their lives miserable since the day she'd moved in 8 months ago. The sound that had been nagging at the edge of his consciousness suddenly made sense. Karen's new ATV, a massive, candy-upheld red Polaris that she rode like she was training for the X Games, sat idling in her driveway. But something was wrong with the picture. An orange extension cord snaked across the 50 yards between their properties, running from Karen's garage to his utility shed, where the main power line fed the medical equipment, keeping his wife alive. Son of a bitch. Marcus sprinted across the frost-brittle grass, his work boots slipping on the patches of ice that hadn't yet surrendered to the morning sun. The extension cord was industrial-grade 12-gauge wire that could handle serious amperage, professional-grade theft. Inside his shed, the picture became crystal clear. Karen had disconnected the main power feed to the house and rerouted it through her extension cord. His expensive medical-grade UPS system, the uninterruptible power supply that was supposed to keep Linda's equipment running during outages, sat powerless. She'd bypassed everything through the shed's small window. He could see Karen in her garage, bent over what looked like a battery charger. A TV sat, connected to his power, drinking electricity that was literally keeping his wife alive. The walk across their shared property line felt like crossing into enemy territory. Karen's garage was a monument to middle-aged rebellion motorcycle. Posters covered the walls, tool benches held half-finished projects, and the smell of motor oil mixed with the ozone scent of electrical equipment. Karen, she turned, and Marcus was struck by how normal she looked. 50-something, graying brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing coveralls that had seen honest work. If he'd passed her in town, he might have nodded politely. But this wasn't town. Oh, hey, Marcus. She straightened up, wrench in hand. How's Linda doing? The casual tone hit him like a physical blow. How's Linda doing? Her oxygen machine just died because you stole our power. Karen's face shifted through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, and then something that looked almost like defiance. Stole, that's a pretty strong word. I just borrowed a little juice to charge my ATV battery. My power's been acting up. Borrowed? Marcus felt his voice climbing toward a shout and forced it back down. You disconnected life support equipment? My wife can't breathe without that machine. Look, I'm sorry about that, but it's not like she's going to die in the next few minutes, right? I mean, people lived without those machines for thousands of years. Karen turned back to her battery charger, as if the conversation was over. I'll disconnect it when I'm done charging. Another hour, maybe 2. The casual dismissal hit Marcus like a slap. An hour? She's got maybe 6 hours of backup oxygen. You're literally stealing her life. Don't be so dramatic. Karen waved the wrench dismissively. Besides, technically, this isn't stealing. The power company runs their lines right along our property boundary, gray area, legally speaking. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the complete disconnect between her words and reality. Gray area. You broke into my shed and rewired my electrical system. That's breaking and entering, theft of services. And he stopped himself. Legal arguments weren't going to help Linda breathe. Fine, you want money? I'll pay for the electricity. How much could it be? $20? The number hung in the air, between them like an obscenity. $20. The cost of Linda's next breath, reduced to loose change. Disconnect it now. I told you, I need another hour or two. My battery's only at 60%. Karen's voice carried that particular tone of someone accustomed to getting their way through sheer stubbornness. Look, why don't you just take your wife to the hospital if you're so worried? Take her to the hospital? Marcus felt something snap inside his chest. She's on hospice care, Karen. The hospital isn't for getting better anymore. It's for dying. For the first time, Karen looked uncomfortable. She fidgeted with the wrench, her eyes avoiding his. Well, I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine. Like I said, an hour or two. Marcus turned and walked away before he did something that would land him in jail. Behind him, Karen's ATV rumbled to life for a test run, the sound like a chainsaw through. His thoughts stopped back in the house. Linda was sitting up in bed, the portable oxygen tank beside her like a mechanical lifeline. She looked up as he entered, her eyes asking the question her voice couldn't waste breath on. Power problem, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I'm working on it. How long? The two words carried the weight of their entire world. Marcus looked at the gauge on the oxygen tank. Maybe 5 hours now. Maybe less if she got agitated. Long enough, don't worry about it. Another lie, but this one felt necessary. Linda closed her eyes and leaned back against the pillows, trusting him to fix what couldn't be fixed, to solve what couldn't be solved. Outside, Karen's ATV roared past their kitchen window, kicking up gravel and dried leaves. She was taking it for a test ride, making sure her stolen power had done its job. The sound faded into the distance, replaced by the steady hiss of oxygen and the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Marcus sat beside his wife and tried to think of a solution that didn't involve calling the police, who would take hours to respond to what they'd probably see as a neighbor dispute or driving Linda to the hospital in the back of their truck, which would likely kill her faster than running out of oxygen. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Saw your post on the township Facebook page about electrical issues. One run Chen Electronics downtown, any relation? Happy to help a fellow Chen. David. Marcus stared at the message, confused. He hadn't posted anything on Facebook. He barely used social media. But then he remembered, Linda managed their Facebook account. Even from her sickbed, she'd been trying to solve their problem. He typed back quickly, yes, married in, wife's dying, neighbor stole our power, need help. The response came immediately. Oh my God, on my way. What's your address? Marcus provided their location and felt the first spark of hope he'd had in hours. Maybe this David Chen could help. Maybe there was still time. Through the window, he could see Karen's garage, still connected to his power line like a parasite. She'd been right about one thing, the legal boundaries were unclear. Their properties shared utilities in ways that dated back to the 1940s, and rural law enforcement wasn't exactly known for its quick response times. But Marcus was starting to realize that legal boundaries might not be the only kind that mattered. His phone rang. Marcus, this is David Chen. I'm about 20 minutes out, but I wanted to ask, do you have access to your neighbor's electrical panel? No, but I can see her garage from here. Why? Just thinking about options. Sometimes the best way to solve an electrical problem is to get creative with the solution. Something in David's tone suggested he understood more about the situation than his words implied. Marcus found himself smiling for the first time in hours. I like creative solutions. Good, because I've got some ideas that might surprise you. See you soon. Outside, Karen's ATV roared back into view, and she pulled up to her garage with the satisfied look of someone whose theft had pie. David Chen's pickup truck rumbled up the gravel driveway like mechanical salvation. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as a lean man in his 30s climbed out, carrying a toolbox that looked like it had survived several wars and a laptop bag that suggested this wasn't just a handyman making a house call. You must be Marcus. David's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. I brought some equipment that might help with your neighbor's situation. Through the living room doorway, Linda raised her hand in a weak wave. David nodded respectfully, his expression growing serious as he took in the hospital bed, the oxygen tank, and the numbers on the gauge that had dropped another hour while they'd waited. Show me what we're dealing with, David said. They walked to the shed, David's trained eye immediately cataloging the jury-rigged theft. He traced the orange extension cord with the reverence of a detective examining evidence, taking photos with his phone from multiple angles. Professional job, he murmured. She knew exactly what she was doing. Bypassed your ups, redirected the main feed. This wasn't impulse. This was planned. Marcus felt his anger crystallize into something harder. She's been thinking about this, oh yeah. David opened his toolbox and pulled out a multimeter. This kind of rewiring takes knowledge and time. She didn't just decide to steal your power this morning. She's been watching, learning your system, waiting for the right moment. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. While Linda had been getting sicker, while they'd been focused on treatments and hope and the daily struggle of keeping her comfortable, Karen had been planning to literally steal the electricity keeping her alive. Can we fix it? Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Oh, we can fix it. But first, let me ask you something. How creative are you feeling? Before Marcus could answer, Karen's voice cut across the yard. Hey, what are you two doing in there? She was walking toward them with the territorial swagger of someone who owned everything she could see. Behind her, the ATV sat in the garage, fully charged and ready for whatever middle-aged adventure she had planned. Just checking my electrical system, Marcus called back, making sure everything's working properly. Well, don't mess with anything. That might affect my power, Karen said, stopping at the property line like there was an invisible fence. I've got things charging. David looked up from his multimeter, his expression professionally neutral. Ma'am, I'm an electrical engineer. Just so you know, what you've done here is called theft of services. It's a felony in this state when the value exceeds $500 or when it endangers life. Karen's face flushed. Who asked you? And it's not endangering anything. Stop being so dramatic. Actually, David continued in the same calm tone. Redirecting power from medical equipment falls under aggravated circumstances. That's a Class C felony. 3 to 10 years. The color drained from Karen's face. You can't prove anything. David held up his phone, showing the photos he'd taken. Documented evidence of tampering with electrical systems, theft of services, and endangerment of a person dependent on life support. Plus, I'm licensed to testify as an expert witness. Marcus watched Karen's bravado crumble like a house of cards. She'd clearly expected to intimidate them into backing down, but David had just shifted the entire battlefield. Fine, Karen snapped. I'll disconnect it when I'm ready. Another hour or so. She stormed back toward her house, but Marcus noticed she didn't actually go inside. Instead, she lingered in her garage, close enough to watch what they were doing. She's scared, David observed. Good scared people make mistakes. He pulled a device from his toolbox that looked like a tablet crossed with a voltage tester. Now, let me show you something interesting about modern electrical systems. The device's screen lit up with a schematic that looked like a digital nervous system. David pointed to various connections, explaining how power flowed through the grid. See this? He indicated a junction point where their properties shared a transformer. Rural electrical systems from the 1940s were designed for cooperation. Neighbors helping neighbors during outages, shared infrastructure to reduce costs. Your grandfather probably helped wire Karen's property when it was first developed. So she's right about the gray area. Legally? Maybe. But there's something she doesn't understand about modern electronics. David's grin was predatory. Everything's computerized now. Smart meters, digital monitoring, remote shutoffs. The power company can track usage down to individual appliances. He pulled out his laptop and opened a program that looked like mission control for the electrical grid. I do consulting work for the Rural Electric Cooperative. Want to guess what I'm seeing in your usage patterns over the last few hours? The screen showed a graph with a massive spike in power consumption, clearly originating from Marcus's connection, but flowing toward Karen's property. The theft was documented in real time, recorded by systems Karen probably didn't even know existed. Holy shit, Marcus whispered. It gets better. See this secondary spike? That's her ATV's charging system. High amperage draw, distinctive signature. I can prove not just that she stole power, but exactly what she used it for and when. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. For months he'd felt powerless watching Linda get sicker, fighting insurance companies, navigating a medical system that seemed designed to exhaust hope. But David had just handed him something Karen couldn't steal, couldn't manipulate, couldn't dismiss. Proof. What can we do with this? Officially, I can file a report with the power company and the sheriff's department. They'll investigate, probably take a few days, maybe issue citations. And unofficially, David's expression grew thoughtful. Well, the beautiful thing about computerized systems is that they're incredibly responsive. For instance, if someone was overloading a transformer with unauthorized usage, the system might automatically implement protective measures such as load balancing, redistribution of power, to prevent grid damage. Sometimes that means temporarily interrupting service to non-essential connections, while maintaining critical infrastructure like medical equipment. David's fingers moved across the laptop keyboard. Of course, I'd need proper authorization to make those kinds of adjustments. Marcus understood. What kind of authorization? A formal complaint from the primary account holder, documenting theft and endangerment. Once that's filed, I'm authorized to take immediate protective action for the grid. How immediate? Oh, very immediate. The safety protocols don't really allow for delays when life support is involved. Marcus looked across the yard at Karen, who was now sitting on her ATV, revving the engine like she owned the world. The sound carried across the November air like a taunt. File the complaint, he said. David's fingers flew across the keyboard. Done. And as the consulting engineer for this sector, I'm implementing emergency load balancing protocols. Now. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, with a sound like a giant switch being thrown, every light in Karen's house went dark. The ATV's engine died mid-rev. Karen's voice carried across the yard. What the hell? Phase 1? David murmured, watching his screen. I've isolated her property from the main grid. Everything she has is now running on whatever stored power she's got. Maybe 30 minutes of battery backup for essential systems. And phase 2? Phase 2 is where it gets interesting. See, her ATV has a computerized ignition system. Very sophisticated, very secure. Unless, of course, someone happens to know the manufacturer's diagnostic codes. David pulled a device from his toolkit that looked like an oversized garage door opener. Remote diagnostic interface? I use it for troubleshooting electrical systems in vehicles. Completely legal for authorized service work, which this isn't. Well, that's debatable. She's using stolen power to charge equipment that's interfering with critical medical infrastructure. I'd say that makes this a public safety issue, wouldn't you? Marcus watched Karen trying to restart her ATV, the engine turning over but not catching. She was getting frustrated, probably assuming it was flooded or had some mechanical problem. What did you do? Temporarily disabled the ignition timing. Nothing permanent, nothing that would show up in a standard diagnostic. But every time she tries to start it, the system will think there's a timing fault and shut down to prevent engine damage. How long will it last? Depends on how stubborn she is. Could be hours. Could be days. The beauty is, it'll run fine for about 30 seconds. Each time before the safety protocol kicks in, just long enough to give her hope. As if summoned by David's words, Karen managed to get the ATV started. It roared to life, and she had just enough time to look triumphant before the engine died again. Son of a bitch. Her voice carried across the yard. Marcus found himself laughing for the first time in weeks. This is diabolical. This is justice with a computer science degree. David closed his laptop with satisfaction. But we're not done yet. See, I've been thinking about your long-term power situation. Even after we resolve this neighbor problem, you're still vulnerable to outages, grid failures, equipment problems. We can't afford a whole backup system. You don't need one. You need something better. David pulled out his phone and made a call. Hey Rachel, it's David. I need that emergency installation we talked about. Yeah, Karen stormed across the frost-brittle grass with the fury of someone who'd just discovered that actions actually had consequences. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and Marcus could hear fragments of her increasingly desperate conversation with what sounded like the power company's customer service line. Don't understand. My entire house just went dark now. There's no streamius. I'll hold. She stopped at the property line, her free hand clenched into a fist. What did you do? David looked up from his laptop with the expression of someone genuinely puzzled by the question. I'm sorry. What do you mean my power's out? Everything just died at the same time you two started messing around in that shed. David made a show of checking his screen. Looks like there's a grid protection event in your sector. Sometimes the system automatically isolates problematic connections to prevent damage to the transformer. Problematic connections? What's that supposed to mean? Well, when someone overloads the grid with unauthorized usage, the smart meters can detect it and implement safety protocols. It's designed to protect critical infrastructure. David's tone was professionally helpful, like a teacher explaining electricity to a slow student, like medical equipment, for instance. Karen's face cycled through confusion, realization, and rage. You can't just cut off my power because you don't like what I'm doing. Oh, I didn't cut off anything. The grid's automated safety systems did that. David showed her his laptop screen, which displayed a complex readout of power distribution. See this red flag here? That indicates theft of services with endangerment factors. The system is designed to prioritize life safety equipment over recreational usage. Recreational. I was just charging my ATV with stolen electricity that was powering life support equipment. David's professional demeanor never wavered. The system doesn't really distinguish between intent and impact. It just knows that someone redirected power from medical equipment to charge a recreational vehicle. Marcus watched Karen's face as the full implications hit her. She wasn't just dealing with an angry neighbor anymore. She was facing a system that had documented her theft and automatically responded to protect his wife's life. When will it come back on? That depends on when the system determines the threat has been resolved. David consulted his screen again. Could be hours, could be days. The algorithms prioritize safety over convenience. Karen's phone buzzed, and she answered it with visible desperation. Hello, yes, this is Karen Hutchins. What do you mean? Unauthorized usage detected. I didn't authorize anything. What? No, I didn't steal. She hung up abruptly, her face pale. The power company says there's an investigation. They want to send someone out to inspect my electrical system. That's standard procedure for theft cases, David said helpfully. They'll need to document everything for the report. What report? The one I filed an hour ago. Theft of services, endangerment of life support equipment, unauthorized modification of electrical systems. The Rural Electric Cooperative takes these things very seriously. Karen stared at him like he'd just announced her death sentence. You can single quotes I mean, I was only borrowing it. The law doesn't really recognize borrowing when it comes to utilities, especially when it endangers someone's life. David closed his laptop with the finality of a judge's gavel. but I'm sure you can work something out with the investigators. The sound of diesel engines approaching cut through the afternoon air. 2 trucks were coming up the gravel road, one from the Rural Electric Cooperative, the other with Chen Electronics painted on the side. That would be the installation crew, David said to Marcus. Your solar array should be online within a few hours. Karen looked between the approaching trucks and David's satisfied expression, finally understanding the full scope of what had just happened to her. You planned this? All of it. I responded to a medical emergency, David corrected. The rest is just the system working as designed. The first truck pulled into Marcus's driveway, and 2 technicians got out carrying clipboards and testing equipment. The second truck was loaded with solar panels and what looked like a substantial battery system. Mr. Chen, the lead technician, approached with the brisk efficiency of someone used to priority installations. We're here for the emergency medical backup system. Where's the patient? Inside, Marcus said, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unreality. 4 hours ago, his wife had been dying because their neighbor had stolen their power. Now, a team of professionals was installing a system that would make them completely independent of the grid. We'll have you up and running in 3 hours. Max, the technician promised. Priority medical installation. Solar with battery backup. Theft-proof connections. Nobody will ever be able to cut your power again. As the crew began unloading equipment, the power company investigator approached Karen. She was a middle-aged woman with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every scam, excuse, and sob story in the book. Ms. Hutchins. I'm Janet Morrison, theft prevention specialist. We need to discuss some irregularities in your power usage. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see Karen's body language growing increasingly defensive as Janet took photos of the extension cord still snaking across the property line. This is insane, Karen said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I used maybe $20 worth of electricity. Ma'am, theft of services isn't calculated by dollar amount when life safety is involved. Jeanette replied in the tone of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. You redirected power for medical equipment. That's a felony regardless of the amount. Karen's face went white. Felony? Aggravated theft of services with endangerment? Class C felony. You're looking at 3 to 10 years if the district attorney decides to prosecute. The installation crew worked with the mechanical precision of a pit crew, running conduit and mounting panels while Karen's world collapsed 50 yards away. Marcus found himself torn between watching his salvation being installed and his neighbor's reckoning playing out in real time. How bad is this going to get for her? He asked David quietly. That depends entirely on how she handles the next few hours. If she cooperates, pays restitution, maybe does some community service, the DA might be willing to plead it down to a misdemeanor if she fights it. David shrugged. The evidence is pretty overwhelming. Across the yard, Karen was now sitting on her dark porch, head in her hands, while Janet continued documenting the theft. Her ATV sat in the garage like a monument to poor decision-making, expensive, fully charged, and completely useless thanks to David's electronic sabotage. What about her power? Marcus asked. The grid safety protocols will restore service once the threat is neutralized. Could be when she disconnects the illegal connection and pays restitution. Could be when she agrees to a formal apology and community service. Really depends on how cooperative she wants to be. And the ATV. David's grin was subtle but unmistakable. Well, that's interesting. See, I might have accidentally triggered the anti-theft mode while I was running diagnostics. Advanced security feature won't start until the owner provides the correct reset code, which is usually something meaningful to the owner. Their anniversary, birthday, social security number. Could take days to figure out, assuming they even know there's a reset code to find. The solar installation was proceeding with remarkable speed. Panels went up on the roof like puzzle pieces, while the battery system took shape in the shed where Karen had done her rewiring. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus's very place she'd stolen their power, was becoming the fortress that would protect them from ever being vulnerable again. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. What's all the noise? Is everything okay? He typed back. Everything's going to be fine. Getting us set up so this never happens again. Her response came immediately. Good, I was worried about you. You've been so angry. The observation hit him like a gentle slap. She was right, he had been angry, furious. Actually, in a way that felt corrosive and dangerous. But watching Karen's comeuppance play out in real time, he realized the anger was already fading, replaced by something that felt like justice. Mr. Chen, the installation supervisor, approached with a tablet. We're ready to bring this system online. Your wife's equipment will be completely protected: solar, battery backup, surge protection, theft detection. Even if someone cuts your main power line, she'll never know the difference. Marcus signed the electronic forms with hands that barely shook. For the first time in months, he wasn't calculating hours of oxygen or worrying about power failures. Linda would be safe. There's one more feature I think you'll appreciate, the supervisor continued. The system has integrated security monitoring. If anyone tries to tamper with your electrical systems, it automatically contacts law enforcement and implements protective countermeasures. What kind of countermeasures? Well, let's just say that anyone who tries to steal your power will find their own electrical systems becoming very unreliable very quickly. The system is designed to protect itself. Across the yard, Janet Morrison was wrapping up her investigation. Karen sat slumped in a lawn chair, looking like someone who'd just watched her life change irrevocably. The investigator approached Marcus and David with a thick folder of documentation. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to let you..." Karen stood at the property line like a defendant awaiting sentencing, her earlier bravado replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd just discovered that the universe keeps meticulous records. The solar panels on Marcus's roof caught the last rays of November sunlight, converting her downfall into the very power that would keep Linda alive. "Before we discuss settlement terms," Janet Morrison said, consulting her tablet, "I need you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with here, Ms. Hutchins." She turned the screen toward Karen, displaying a detailed breakdown that looked like a prosecutor's dream. Theft of services, documented. Endangerment of life support equipment, documented. Unauthorized modification of electrical systems, documented. Breaking and entering to access the utility shed, documented. Karen's face grew paler with each item. "I didn't break in. The shed wasn't locked. Doesn't matter under state law. Unauthorized entry with intent to commit theft is still breaking and entering." Janet's tone was matter-of-fact, like she was reading a grocery list. "The felony charges alone carry a potential sentence of 3 to 10 years. But let me finish." Janet's voice cut through Karen's protest like a blade. "Then we have the federal aspect. Theft of services from medical equipment falls under healthcare fraud statutes. That's another 5 to 20 years. Federal prison." The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus watched Karen's knees actually buckle as the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. "However," Janet continued, "Mr. Chen is willing to consider a civil settlement. David, you want to outline the terms?" David opened his laptop with the ceremony of someone unveiling a masterpiece. The civil settlement would require several components. First, full restitution for the stolen electricity which, given the medical necessity multiplier and emergency response costs, comes to approximately $8,000. Karen's sharp intake of breath was audible across the yard. Second, payment for the emergency solar installation necessitated by your theft, $37,000. $37,000, Karen's voice cracked. 4 solar panels. Medical backup system with theft-proof security, priority installation, and lifetime monitoring, David explained. Much more expensive than residential solar, but absolutely necessary given what happened. Marcus felt a brief moment of sympathy for Karen, but it evaporated when he remembered Linda struggling to breathe while this woman charged her ATV with stolen power. Third, David continued, formal written apology to be published in the county newspaper, acknowledging the theft and its impact on a terminally ill patient. "You want to humiliate me in the paper? We want you to take public responsibility for what you did," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe prevent someone else from thinking they can steal power from sick people." Janet consulted her notes. Fourth, 200 hours of community service at Regional Medical Center, specifically assisting families with home medical equipment. You'll learn firsthand what it's like when people depend on electrical systems to stay alive. 200 hours? Karen was clearly calculating the cost in time and lost income. And finally, David said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, permanent agreement never to interfere with, modify, or access the electrical systems on this property. Violation of this agreement would immediately trigger both criminal prosecution for this incident and new charges for any future interference. The terms hung between them like a contract with the devil. Karen looked from face to face, searching for sympathy and finding only the cold mathematics of justice. "What if I can't pay $45,000? I don't have that kind of money." "Payment plan," Janet said simply. 5 years, reasonable interest. Miss a payment, and we're back to criminal prosecution. And if I refuse the settlement entirely, then we proceed with criminal charges. Federal and state. You'll be arrested within the week, and given the evidence, conviction is essentially guaranteed. Janet's tone never changed, as if she were discussing the weather. Prison time would be measured in years, not months. Marcus watched Karen's face cycle through the stages of grief denial. Anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a kind of numb acceptance. The woman who'd casually dismissed his wife's life as not that important was finally understanding that actions have weight in the world. "There's one more thing," David said, pulling out the device he'd used to sabotage. "Karen's ATV. Your vehicle has been temporarily disabled as a safety precaution. Part of the settlement agreement includes restoration of full functionality. You broke my ATV? I activated standard theft prevention protocols. Nothing permanent, but it won't run until the proper reset codes are entered." David's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. Consider it incentive to settle quickly. The solar installation crew was packing up their equipment, leaving behind a system that transformed property into an electrical fortress. LED indicators throughout the house showed green. Linda's equipment was now powered by sunlight and protected by technology Karen couldn't steal. couldn't understand, and couldn't touch. I need time to think, Karen said finally. You have 20 hours, Janet replied. After that, I file criminal charges, and this settlement offer expires. What happens to my power? David consulted his laptop. The grid safety protocols will restore service once the system determines the threat has been neutralized. That happens when you formally agree to the settlement terms and disconnect your illegal power connection. So I sit in the dark until I agree to pay you $45,000. You sit in the dark until you stop being a threat to medical equipment, Marcus corrected. The money is just what it costs to fix what you broke. Karen looked around at the assembled faces, Janet with her legal authority, David with his technological power, Marcus with his righteous anger, and seemed to finally understand that this wasn't a negotiation, it was an accounting. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll take the settlement. Excellent choice, Janet said, producing documents from her folder. We can execute the agreement right now. Karen signed the papers with shaking hands, each signature sealing her fate a little more completely. As she wrote her name for the final time, the lights in her house flickered back to life, and the sound of her electrical systems restarting carried across the yard like a mechanical sigh of relief. Your power's been restored, David announced, closing his laptop. The grid safety protocols have logged your compliance. What about my ATV? David handed her a small card with a series of numbers. Reset code. Enter it in the diagnostic menu, and everything will return to normal. Karen pocketed the card without looking at it. When do I start the community service? Monday morning, 7 a.m., Janet said. Report to the volunteer coordinator at Regional Medical. They'll explain your duties. What kind of duties? Helping families understand home medical equipment, teaching them about power requirements, backup systems, emergency procedures. Janet's expression was almost kind. Maybe you'll learn something about what it means when someone's life depends on electricity staying on. As Karen walked back toward her house, moving like someone carrying an invisible weight, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, a kind of hollow satisfaction. Justice had been served, restitution would be paid, and Linda would never again be vulnerable to a neighbor's casual cruelty. But victory felt more complicated than he'd imagined. You okay? David asked, noticing his expression. I thought I'd feel better about this. Justice isn't about feeling better. It's about making sure the right thing happens, whether it feels good or not. David packed his equipment with the satisfied efficiency of a job well done. She'll pay her debt, do her service, and hopefully learn that other people's lives matter. That's more than most people get. The November evening was settling over the prairie like a cold blanket, but the solar batteries hummed quietly in the shed, storing power for Linda's equipment through the night. The system was completely independent, now no grid connections. Karen could steal, no vulnerabilities she could exploit. Marcus walked back into the house, where Linda was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in days. The stress lines around her eyes had eased, and her breathing seemed less labored. How do you feel? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Safe, she said simply. For the first time in months, I feel safe. The oxygen concentrator hummed, steadily beside the bed, powered by sunlight captured hours earlier and stored in batteries that would outlast the night. The numbers on the display were steady, reliable, protected. What happened out there? Linda asked. I heard a lot of talking, and Karen looked pretty upset when she went back inside. Marcus considered how much to tell her, then decided on the truth. She learned that stealing from sick people is more expensive than she thought. Linda's smile was soft, but knowing good, maybe she'll think twice before she hurts someone else. Outside, Karen's house glowed with electric lights that she now understood weren't really hers to control. Her ATV sat in the garage, functional again, but forever tainted by the memory of what it had cost her. And somewhere in her kitchen, $1,000 worth of legal documents waited to be filed, processed, and paid. The price of $20 worth of stolen electricity had turned out to be everything she